And welcome to another edition of Future Forward. Hey, Gene, how are you?
Hey, Steve, how's it going?
We've got so much, it's funny. I keep thinking a half hour is going to be plenty. And then when we look at the rundown, we got some feedback last week from a couple of our fans who said they'd love to hear up top of the show what the chapters of the podcast were going to be so that they could then, if we gave them a little time marker, they could jump ahead so they could choose what they want to listen to. And that seemed to me like a fairly reasonable thing to do. So three chapters today. Chapter 1, CNN, AT&T, Time Warner, and the Justice Department should be frothy and good. Chapter 2 is a deep dive into Roku and why it's winning. And Chapter 3 is going to be, can politics survive social media? But first, our trademark opening, we're gonna talk about what we're loving and what we're hating.
All right. So you want me to go first?
Please do.
Okay. And then I think the other trademark of those quick takes we should do as well right after that if we have time.
We do.
So what I'm loving right now is a new app called HQ Trivia. Some of you may have heard of it. Some of you haven't. It's typical of these new apps or new services that can come out of nowhere and cause a huge splash. This is a very, very big deal. Check out the iPhone app. Live broadcast in video at 3 p.m. Eastern and 9 p.m. Eastern. 50, 75, 100,000 people are now live participating in a rapid elimination series of trivia questions where you choose multiple choice, and one person at the end is going to win $1,000, $5,000, $500. It's pretty amazing, and it's one of those things that feels very duh in retrospect, but it's a real lot of fun, and it's opened a lot of people's eyes really fast.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's really, really great. We'll dive deeper on some of these things coming forward. The second, because I know we don't have a lot of time to is Verizon Fios, what I'm hating. And I could do this one every week. So I'm a longtime user of Verizon Fios, and I was so glad when Fios came to my neighborhood. And I love the idea of the maximum broadband, so of course I sign up for the maximum. But it is no ending of frustrating, whether it's how terrible their customer service is, how lame the software is that helps you manage your television, or how, most importantly, how terrible the plight is now for a family or an individual in the home trying to manage and toggle all the various channels that are getting internet and your 20, iOS devices and your 3 set-top boxes. It's a disaster, and they don't deserve to be making so much money monopolization-wise.
All right, so mine, on the thing I'm loving, I have dug into my friend Rob Reed's book, After On. It's a big book. Like, no joke. Like, you can't take it on the subway because it probably needs to be licensed as a weapon. It's so big. But it is a great read, and I'm really enjoying it. And I actually got the software on my phone to read it because, like, I want to be able to carry it with me. So that I'm loving. In the what I'm hating this week, I'm a little overwhelmed with the politics in my brain. I'm just a little. I went to the movies last night, and I literally saw a great movie called The Square. Recommend it, but more to the point, it was 90 minutes when I did not have my phone in my hand.
Wow.
So loving and hating. That's where I am.
And you know what? I think it's going to be symbolic of this show that we're going to come back to this a few other times because it touches almost every one of these topics in some way. And no matter how much we don't want to talk about the politics or what we like or don't, how they influence things, boy, nightmare.
All right, so quick takes real fast because we got to go.
Yep.
Number one, Snapchat.
Total innovator, totally blowing it. I actually hope they can survive it, but I just don't know. My kids still swear by it.
They are the focus group. They are the demo. All right, I'll do number two. Equifax. There should be business prison. Like, it could be a white collar prison, but these guys, like, I just don't get how they can say we can't even anyway. Equifax total fail.
Yep.
At the risk of getting into politics, but these are quick takes, so we're going to go fast. Tax reform. Does it happen?
I think I'm praying that it doesn't, and I hope that we get enough dialogue that's sane, which is way asking too much. I don't know how to predict it.
I'm gonna go sharper than that. It doesn't happen before Christmas. The great big not gonna happen. Yep. All right, last but we got one more, and then we're gonna jump to segment one. Fox Disney merger acquisition.
The merger, it's absolutely mind-boggling and absurd. I see no problems because, as we're going to talk later, the whole antitrust thing has become just a riddle of why would anyone care. But I do find it mind-boggling.
All right, so now let's get to segment one. Here we are, segment one, the Today segment. CNN, AT&T, Department of Justice. I almost don't know where to begin.
Maybe, Steve, maybe just give a little snapshot for people that aren't into the nuance of exactly what's happening, especially this idea of how like the soccer ball is like CNN or something like that in this. It's absurd.
So it's easy to kind of zone out and be like, AT&T, it's another big media merger, but it's really a big deal. AT&T is one of the two predominant distributors of bandwidth in the country. Time Warner has enormous content assets, television, film, news. It was going to be a big deal. Everyone, the Justice Department said, no, we're fine. It's going to go through. There wasn't a sense that it was going to hit a snag in the road, except Trump in the campaign said, we're going to take a hard look at it, specifically because AT&T, Time Warner, would be the transfer of CNN. And he does not like CNN. And
right.
And now it seems like it. I don't even know who to believe anymore. The Justice Department says they didn't raise CNN as a problem. AT&T is saying they never heard about CNN being a problem, but it's pretty clear it's a problem.
Yeah, and it's not. It doesn't align in terms of political ideology. It's a classic case of, by definition, conservative ideology would say, let it go. We don't need to restrain these guys. But the personal foibles of Trump is, in the case of CNN, if that's really what it is, the issue. It feels completely absurd to me. The digital analog, which happened and went right through, was Verizon AOL a year or two ago, which had a few hurdles and, I think is closed by now. So I don't know it's just hard to read the Justice Department on this. What do you think? I mean, do you think that it's I guess we have to see what there really are in the way of hearings.
The question is, do you believe that it's anti-competitive? Do you believe that there's a real issue with it? If take the politics out of the equation for a second, do you think it's an issue?
Absolutely not. We have Roku coming up in a second, and that's part of cord cutting, which is disrupting this idea that there's only one way for you to get your content. So, these things can't all cancel each other out. They have to make sense together. And this is not 1992.
Yeah, I mean, here's why you have to feel bad for AT&T and Verizon. That's said with sarcasm.
Exactly.
They own a lot of bandwidth, but what we know, if you look at technology historically, is gigabytes get cheaper, prices go down. So they've got this money machine that's going to last them another 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, but it's not indefinite.
That's
and
right.
If they don't, so both Verizon and AT&T have been, in different ways making big plays for content. Verizon looked like the more aggressive player, but all of a sudden AT&T kind of comes up sleepy from behind and says, yeah, but if we actually, and you start looking at what Time Warner has in its bushel, it has all the Turner properties, it has all those cable channels, it has CNN, it's got Warner Brothers, it's got all the all those big, comic book movie franchises. It's a big content play.
Yeah, it's a big content, but to me, it's not a drop in the bucket compared to the vastness of what's out there right now. And so what's interesting, I think that, again, we're going to get into in a couple of the next ones, is it's not even to say industries, sectors in this whole jigsaw puzzle are kind of aligning against each other, even while within the sector there's blood war, right? So the whole idea of Apple and Google owning the front end of these devices and in partnership with the carriers, and together they're the ones that somehow get this stuff to us. Who really owns the front end of that is a big deal. But you and I have been doing this for a while, and there was a period where just owning content was, who cared about that anymore? Now everyone's investing in it. It's a big deal. It's a requirement. There's more power than there's been in a long time in the hands of these guys, but it's diffuse.
So let's go to chapter 2, because I think that maybe is exactly where we want to be.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Roku. First of all, I should know this, Gene, and I don't. Do you own one? I
don't own Roku. I debated it many times, and I don't. How about you?
I do. And I'm a little, I thought about whether or not I was going to admit this on the podcast, but I guess I'll kind of out myself.
Full disclosure.
I use it mostly for two things. I use it for Netflix, and I use it if I've got a movie on a USB drive that I want to get onto my TV, because you can plug it into Roku. I mean to be looking more at the OTT channels that are on Roku. I really do, and I will someday. I promise.
Right, but you haven't. I think this is much less about that stuff. And even though I noticed in the earnings reports, blow it out the doors, part of it has to do with incremental increases in advertising, which is something that doesn't happen in Netflix and other places. This is about, if you're not getting your content through your television or cable provider or internet provider into your home, what else are you doing? And in one instance, how are you getting it to your large screen TV? I happen to be pretty happy going between my iPad and my iPhone on the one hand, and my Samsung that is really, really pretty decent, even though it's got crappy software, at letting me bypass and go over to Netflix and Amazon. So I don't really have a need for Roku, even though the analyst in me might have tried it out, or Slingbox, or a few of the others.
So here's the thing about Roku that people forget. The CEO of Roku is a low-key guy. Like, you probably don't know his name unless you're geeked out on Roku. His name is Anthony Wood. And if that name sounds familiar to our listeners, it's because he was the original innovator of ReplayTV. My guess is you have to be 200 years old to remember Replay. It lasted for 12 seconds. It was the early competitor to TiVo. He actually owns a bunch of the foundational patents in the DVR world. He's a seriously geeked out guy.
Right.
And Roku is like his passion and dream come true.
Yeah, it's like a chess move too. Like, he's not just not splashy. The company is not a gigantic brander, but it's a particular solution that's well-fashioned in exactly that slot. And I think there's a big deal to just finish on, which is that I think it's such an easy thing for me to just boom on my iPhone or iPad, and my Samsung suddenly shows my Netflix or whatever else. Typical consumers still can't claw their way inside the TV and do anything else other than get what the cable provider's giving them.
Yeah, I give them a lot of credit. I think they've been at it a long time. I think the numbers are awesome. It's a relatively inexpensive box.
Yeah.
And I think he, it would be interesting to me. Both Roku and TiVo are in the same little part of the valley, and I assume that they're like next door neighbors.
Right.
I assume there's some version of frenemies.
Yes.
Because TiVo doesn't have a box. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Netflix is the other neighbors. Like, I always think to myself, that internally at Netflix they must go, let's just build a box.
Yeah,
we got a brand.
Yeah. Last thing on this too. They need to be careful. It is instant that you can go from the heights of great earnings and everything to being complete dust. My feeling is they're gonna get blown away or have to get themselves acquired within a year or 18 months, because there's just too many things that are going to squeeze them out. Unless they're merging and rolling up with someone, which I'm not. I have to think about how that works, and maybe that's what you're indicating with Netflix.
No, I hadn't thought of that, but it's interesting. Do you remember Google TV?
Sure.
So it was a Logitech box,
Yep.
and it was going to be the next thing since sliced bread.
Yeah.
And then
Yep.
it wasn't.
And then it wasn't. And I don't know what the brand and future of Chromecast is either. I mean, these are little pieces of things, and it's really interesting what software guys do when they try to enter some of these categories. It's it'll be really interesting. Still, this many years after his death, the last aha supposedly of Steve Jobs was going to be, I finally figured out how to solve TV, but I don't really see big evidence that they've made their big move yet. It's just, I'm not sure what it is.
And you have an Apple TV?
I don't have an Apple TV. I've used it. I've had it. I don't mind it. It's not a game changer to me. It's just an overlay onto the television in a way. I don't see it as being, and this is because Apple historically is disinterested in content and disinterested in community. They're just, it's not a thing they do. They get their hands, dirty with it. It's so funny that for all those years of iTunes, there's nothing social in it.
And yet they're about to put, what did they announce? How many billions of dollars into content?
Yep. And it may be that large order of magnitude leapfrog things like making a TV show or a movie or whatever else is something that they can do because that's done by a studio and then released in a certain way on their platform. It's not like them rolling up their sleeves and getting dirty with consumers.
All right, so chapter 3, and this is going to be the one where I think we've got some headbanging to do because it's complicated. Sure. So chapter 3 is the one we've been waiting for. Can democracy survive social media? And it starts. There was a great article in The Economist. Do social media threaten democracy?
Right.
With a Facebook logo looking like a handgun. It was a bit of a page turner because it said some things that I think a lot of people have been quietly wondering about in the Valley and in the New York tech scene. Like, have we really, created a nightmare? A
destructive monster that divides. It just has a natural. It's an excellent article, and I was meaning to ask you because it's a fine line semantically. They use democracy. You use politics in titling this question because I do think there's a little bit of a distinction. There are, so the idea is it about politics is just irrevocably ruined or compromised by social media, or democracy is. Politics, social media is just the next TV for politics, which is to say the selling of elected officials and the process of getting elected and how word gets out. I find that we're in the middle of a transition in the U.S. and it's really hard to know whether we have propped up a two-party system that makes everything more controlled and less all over the place. A lot of places in countries in Europe are used to the madness and the chaos of having 8, 10, 12 parties, and they shift alliances, and things are just, now that's happening on the floors of their congresses and things like that. I don't know. What do you have a summary sort of feeling or hunch about it? It's a bold thing to say, this is going to threaten democracy or threaten the ability for politics to be waged.
I think 3 things happened at the same time that no, perfect storm of complexity that we couldn't have counted on. I think there is no doubt in my mind that the Russians, operated a very specific, very strategic, very successful kind of disruption campaign against our election, and did so I think less to support Hillary or support Trump or support any candidate than just to be kind of meddlesome, to get people angry at each other.
Yeah, they want to sow unrest in this country. Yeah,
I mean, they were on both sides of the Black Lives Matter issue.
Yeah,
they were on the blue sides matter, the black sides. So the Russians, I think, play a role. I think Trump's unique and maybe once in a lifetime kind of history with The Apprentice and his, people's secret enjoyment of his kookiness, and the sense that it's a show, and that, the number of people have said to me, well, all politicians are, and I'm like, no, actually not. No, all politicians don't tweet. If you look at the history of how the White House works, when the president says words, they go through all kinds of layers and they get checked through all kinds of prisms.
No, there's never been such unrestrained id and lack of pausing.
So I think you've got Trump, I think you've got the Russians, and then I think you have kind of the growth of social media. And if you go back even 4 years to the last election before Trump, social media was, when I would get on the subway to go to work, if I looked up and down the subway car 4 years ago, 20% of the people had phones in their hands, 25. And some people had a book, and some people were reading the newspaper, and some people had their eyes closed. Now it's 80% have a phone in their hand. That's in 4 years. So I think when you take those three things, the power of social media, and by social media we mean essentially Facebook.
Yep.
And then, the Russians' involvement, and then Trump's kind of destabilizing nature and Twitter, those three things add up to being, a real clear and present danger to our democracy.
I think the question with that I'm glad you said it that way, because in some countries there are controls and restrictions, whether it's on financing or on the ways in which the messaging can go out, or the time frame of elections, right? The whole idea of having such a long period of time. I mean, sure, you can do all your pre-stuff, but should we really have a primary season that essentially means a whole 1/4 of a presidential term is occupied by this whole large stage thing? The question is, will some of that get managed? And I don't really know the answer. As much as, to me, Russia and Trump are both dramatic, and you're right, they've accelerated a perfect storm of the moment, but they're also not. Trump's once in a lifetime in some ways, but I think he will now trigger people that are going to go that way a lot. And I don't see the Russian thing as much more of a big deal than 100 other potential influences, not least of which would be China or internal, forces. But I'm not saying it's not important. I'm just not worried about them individually. The question is there legislation that changes it? Do things evolve in a certain way? How does the money flow in politics? That may dictate it. What Trump proved in some ways is you don't need money.
Well, not if all the networks are going to cover you wall to wall as they did.
Yeah. So
we have just a few minutes left, and one of the questions, Gene, that I wanted to ask you is, what has changed in, it seems to me like the excitement, the bubbling nature of there being a party, and I don't mean political party, I mean tech party. You and I both remember when there was not a night in the week when somebody didn't have an open bar with top shelf liquor and lots of shrimp and some new startup that had a passel of venture capital. That some of that kind of exuberance seems to have died down. I don't know if you agree, and if so, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's probably a good thing in net, because we are talking about a mature industry that's pervasive. I mean, we know that there were three big factors that made the 90s a true moment in time that won't happen again. One is the technology and the marketplace was converging, even though it was new, to trigger a few things. The second was it was just a smaller community. It was a smaller community of people, of companies, of places where there were people and companies and talent, largely New York and San Francisco, London, and a few other places, Paris. And then the third is the financial aspect of how companies evolved. This was so powered by seed, investment, IPO, boom. I mean, how many IPOs were part of the whole, the madness of these cycles? And now it's a completely different thing. For a company to get to level 2 or 3 is to settle into, adolescence, which oddly is a kind of a calm period. I feel there's also cynicism. As an East Coaster, I am somewhat dismayed by the dickishness and libertarian aspects of a lot of Silicon Valley, the vibes that come through. And so I think these are not, we're not cheering for 22-year-olds the way we used to.
It's interesting. I as a fan of free shrimp and top shelf liquor, I'm somewhat disappointed. And it is interesting. It has gone from being, new media to being media, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there is no doubt.
Yeah. Well, I want to add a coda to that, which is that I went to the University of Virginia and I've been involved and visited down there, and it's one of hundreds of relatively small communities or university areas and all around the world. This is a democratized thing that is very exciting for millions or tens of millions of people. So entrepreneurialism has never been so frothy. Now, the reality of where you go with it may be like trying to become an NBA player or something like that, but it's pretty amazing. And in the world of, of the gig economy, I think these things start to converge. So you're right. It's not a plate of shrimp, but there's some milkshakes here and there.
All right. So we're out of time. Last thing, folks. We now have a website, futureforwardpodcast.com. You can get old episodes. You can comment there. You can find links. You can tweet. It is as are all things with this podcast. It's a work in progress, but you'll find the links from the show on there, and
don't forget the I think available as a podcast too. I think that may have happened between last week and this week.
Available on iTunes. So please feel free to share the podcast, which makes it a little easier to carry us in your pocket if you so desire. And with that, we are out of time. So we'll say goodbye for now, Gene, and keep an eye on the week ahead. It's going to be a very interesting week, and we'll be back next week.
Bye.